The Irish presidential farce sham lurches from one crisis to another. And today, to speak about where we're currently at, I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Vincent Carroll. And I first saw this guy. I'm not gonna lie to you, folk. I have no idea actually about his background or who he is. I'm just doing this one blind. But I go by my gut instinct. I heard him speaking at a rally in Dublin on Sunday for about a minute, and I thought, I need to talk to this guy about what's going on. So first and foremost, welcome, Dr. Vincent Carroll, to No Risk, No Reward. Tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself before we dive right into the main topic here, which is the presidential farce.
Thank you very much, Rick, for having me on your show, and it's appreciated. I'm delighted to be here. A little bit about myself. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a public health doctor. I was involved. I was busy with public health medicine up until the COVID era, when I realised that things did not just seem right in the whole area of COVID. And then when I started to go on a solo run, if you like, because my dear colleagues were all rowing in, whereas I wasn't, I found myself at the wrong end of the regulatory body, the Medical Council. And that got me in touch with other people who got in touch with other people. And we have the lovely term, although some people hate this term, but I quite like it, that I woke up. In other words, I made connection with other people on a whole range of other topics. My trust in government failed after that, because for the most part, Irish people we're relatively trusting of our politicians and our government. Not anymore, I hasten to add, but in the old days that was, going back to my parents' generation. So I went on a very steep learning curve. Sadly, I lost a lot of colleagues, I lost a lot of friends. On a positive, I gained an awful lot more genuine, more committed friends. So here I am now, and I've been very much involved in the whole, I don't like using the word protest movement, but in the whole bring back normal, or trying to get things back to normality again within this particular country. And of course, there's an international dimension to it all as well that I'm very much aware of. So here I am, and I'm at your disposal.
Oh, that's great. And it's a strange thing as well, because all the shenanigans and skullduggery that transpired over, I would say, let's say the last 5 years, obviously there's been stuff going on for a lot longer than that, but the last 5 years from 2020 in particular seems to have crystallized a body of people and brought a body of people together that otherwise I would say paths would never have crossed. Like my background, I worked for a long time in financial services, and before I quit my last job, I was working for a large government housing provider, the chief executive of whom was a member of the World Economic Forum. And then I took to the internet to start speaking out about certain topics. So I knew my cards were marked and my time was short. I ended up getting out of that, going into a startup talk radio show. And then last year I went out on my own. And like I said, every cloud has a silver lining, possibly, and a lot of good people, I believe, have been brought together as a result of what's went on. But today, we're brothers in arms, as it were, against government corruption in the shape of this Irish presidential race, if you want to even call it a race. So for the benefit of the people that are listening from outside of Ireland, if I wrote it down as a comedy script or an episode of Father Ted, or some mothers do have them, people might look at it going, that you can't cover that looks too outlandish. What you're proposing is a script, people being pulled up for rental discrepancies with their tenants, and then finding out that the man wasn't even a landlord to begin with, and then another candidate's backed by the Communist Party of Ireland, and she came out yesterday and said that she actually did work for multinational banks, possibly repossessing clients and putting herself forward as a socialist. Another candidate in this race puts herself forward as a ladies' woman. She's all for the ladies, and in reality last year she tried to get the word mother and family abolished out of the Irish Constitution. You couldn't make this up.
No, the whole thing has become a total embarrassment. There are a number of factors here. Firstly, there's a whole business about actually getting your name on the ballot paper. Secondly, there's your suitability to be there. And then, of course, there's your background as well that one has to look into. But the main problem is in actually getting on the ballot paper. But for listeners outside of the island of Ireland, I'd probably say that the president, I suppose, is the highest office in the land. It is viewed as a symbolic office, but it's far far more than that. The president is quite a powerful job, but that power has never really been exercised to any significant extent. For example, all bills passed by Parliament have to be signed off by the President. He could simply refer a bill to the Supreme Court. He has that authority to do so. Our last president, who's been there for 14 years, because you can serve 2 7-year terms, only referred one bill in his life over those 14 years to the Supreme Court for an opinion, because to see is it constitutional, because a president is the guardian of the constitution. That's what you're meant to be anyway. I mean, you cut red ribbons and you do other things as well, but the most important thing is that you're the guardian of the constitution. So that's the presidential job, it's a very, very important role, and that's the first thing I want to say. And it's often viewed in the old days as a retirement ground for senior politicians, but it's far more than that. And in recent times, more and more people from a range of different points of view have been attempting to get on the ballot paper, but they've all been stymied, particularly this time round. And that's the major problem. I mean, now, I suppose, with one of the candidates having withdrawn in disgrace, there's probably well over 50% of the electorate who have a vote, but who have nobody to vote for. In effect, they have been disenfranchised. And could you call that democracy? I certainly don't. It's some sort of a fake democracy. But that's called sort of in a nutshell. And I can talk on and lead on if you wish, or maybe you've something to ask me about that.
That's a great block of speech that you've just presented to people, for those especially that are listening outside of Ireland, or even actually for those that are inside of Ireland, because the presidency role, it's looked at almost with an aura of mystery to it as well, but it is a significant position to hold. And if we can rewind back a touch, because you talked about, number one, you talk about democracy. Number two, you talk about choice. And number three, you mentioned the word disenfranchised. So let's try and make a cake with all of those terms and expressions. This debacle really started, let's say, a few months ago, when it became clear that the leader of Fine Gael, Simon Harris, the despicable Simon Harris, made it very, very clear that people in his party were not to endorse any potential candidates from outside of Fine Gael. Micheál Martin, up until recently, said that there would be severe consequences for anyone in his party that didn't toe the Jim Gavin line. And there were plenty of, let's just say, reasonable candidates that were blocked, gerrymandered, or stymied from getting on that ballot. One in particular that I think set the touch paper to draw people's attention in on this race was Maria Steen. So Maria Steen, her background, she's a barrister, qualified barrister, an architect, mother of, I think, 5 children. She's a stay-at-home mother. She educates her children, comes from a good background, a good solid background. She opposed the 2 referendum last year in the government. When she went on television with Micheál Martin, she tore strips out of him. I think she embarrassed him when she was on national TV with him. And she was an appealing candidate. She seemed to tick a lot of boxes. She's not perfect. None of us are perfect, but she certainly ticked a lot of boxes there and would have been a great alternative or a great option for people to vote for. But she was absolutely shut down and shut out of that race. And I think it actually drew a lot of people's attention to the race and hacked a lot of people off, to the point whereby there's another poll or thing running alongside this. It's to spoil the vote, to try and make this look like the biggest Horlicks that there's ever been. So throwing it back to you again, would it be safe to say that Maria Steen's blocking, and it was a blocking, it was an engineered, orchestrated attempt to keep her well away from that ballot, even to get onto the ballot, let alone win the race? Was that the beginnings of drawing people's attention in on this, and things have just went from bad to worse ever since?
Oh, I certainly think so. I mean, she would be a most excellent candidate in many ways, but there were other excellent candidates as well who were also stymied from getting on the ballot paper. See, the whole thing is, how do you get on the ballot paper? And there are 2 ways to do so, and that's controlled by our constitution. And the first way is to get 4 county councils to back you. In other words, the majority of 4 county councils have to, I'm sure it's about, 40 or 50 county councils in Ireland. 4 of them have to back you, but all county councils are composed of parliamentarians from the main political parties. For the most part, there are some independents, but you have to get 4 behind you. Or secondly, you have to get 20 members of the Oireachtas. The Oireachtas are both houses of parliament, the upper house called the Dáil and the lower house called the Dáil and the upper house called the Senate. So you have to get 20 members of this Oireachtas, or you have to get 4 county councils behind you. Now, unless a political party, a member of a political party supports you, there's no way that can happen. And as you said, our Premier, our Prime Minister, our Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, made it very, very clear that nobody has a future within Fianna Fáil, the government party, unless they stymie anybody else wanting to get your name on the ballot paper. And of course, Simon Harris, leader of Fine Gael, which is the second biggest party probably in the country, Fine Gael, also, and they're in a coalition anyway, also stymied anybody by getting on to the county councillors and members of the Oireachtas. Don't vote for anybody beyond the person from your own party. Now, Fianna Fáil nominated a guy called Jim Gavin, a football manager basically, and Fine Gael nominated somebody who is a party operative, somebody who's been there for a generation, who's never done very much as far as I know, except said yes, yes, yes to everything and obeyed every single party whip and is absent from any form of controversy whatsoever. A loyal party, sort of dull individual. And then there's a radical socialist or a fake socialist called Catherine Connolly. But they were able to get on the ballot paper because they were supported by major political parties. Fianna Fáil supported their own, Fine Gael supported their own, and Sinn Féin and a very radical Marxist, tiny little non-consequential bunch of people called People Before Profit, they also supported Catherine Connolly. So we had 3 people going forward who would have had no difficulty getting on the ballot because they could have garnered enough support. Now, everybody else had to beg and try to scrounge around for support. And Maria Steen almost made it, but she didn't. I think she got 18 members of parliament, known as TDs, to actually get there. But she needed 2 more. And in that, sadly, she failed. But the reason for that is she's an articulate person. And as you said, she'd be well able to shape up in any debate whatsoever. But as I said, she was only one of a number of talented people who were denied a position on the ballot paper. And getting on the ballot paper is controlled by the Constitution. So that's probably the first stumbling block here.
When I'm zoning in, I was covering a friend of mine who I have on regularly as a guest, Mark Anthony. He brought Maria Steen to my attention maybe a month or 2 ago. To be honest, I wasn't really that aware of her, but I thought I respect his views and opinions. And if he's saying that this would be a worthy candidate for the presidency, well, then it's worth looking at. So then we did some chats like the way we're doing at the minute to try and bring people's attention to Maria Steen. And a lot of people that listen to this show weren't aware really of her either. And some people like her, some people don't. But the fact that you mentioned there also, and you also mentioned there were several worthy candidates, not taking anything away from any of those other candidates at all. But I think it's fair to say, Vincent, that she came closest to crossing that threshold by a long shot. She got up to 18 nominations, which in and of itself, given the amount of shutdowns that were going on, even to get 18 was some going. And I thought it was very cruel. It was a cruel thing that she got so close. And on the morning of the cutoff where the nominations had to be made, she only needed 2 more members of the Oireachtas to back her. And there were more than 2 that should have absolutely backed her. And shame on them for not doing it. One of them, I believe, McDowell, has came out and said, you know what, I don't really like her. And I knew that if I nominated her, I knew she would actually win the presidency. So at least, loathsome and disgusting a move as that is, at least he was honest. He said, I don't like her, I don't want her to win. And I knew if I had a nominator, she would have won. At least he came out and said it.
I believe that McDowell seriously misled the Irish people, and this is a personal point of view on this one, because he did some very good work in getting government defeated in the last referendum that wanted to erase the word woman and mother out of the Constitution. So therefore, if you like, people presumed that he was on our side. Yes. But he issued a statement in the Irish Times because it was viewed as a betrayal, what he did, basically, unworthy of a person of character. after. But then he explained himself, which he had to obviously, and he said, "Well, look, I'm not in favour of this. I'm a liberal, and I'm not in favour of the Conservative agenda anyway." And that's more or less what he said. So you just have to take that at face value. But many people, including myself, would view that as a betrayal because people were misled by him. As far as I'm concerned, I certainly was misled. I thought he was on our side. And Maria Steen presumed, very incorrectly as it turned out, that he would be one of her backers, one of her supporters, and all her telephone calls and emails and everything remained unanswered. So it was very clear from the beginning there was going to be a problem with him. But he's only one guy. I mean, there are other members of the Oireachtas, but
Yeah.
if you were in a political party in the Oireachtas and if you came out in favour of Maria Steen or anybody else or lent your weight, you were out of the party, you were cast into outer political darkness, and your career was over. And a lot of this, sadly, is about career rather than about altruism. But anyway.
A career, indeed, a lot of people are moved by career to the detriment of their own character. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of people were chomping at the bit to have backed Maria Steen, but because of this bully boy tactics and this intimidation and this fear of losing out on their future career, possible future career, they were kept in their place. They were pigeonholed and they were shut up effectively as a result of bully boy tactics. So that gets us back to I want to park Maria to the side for now because she hasn't quite gone away yet in that she's calling for this whole shebang to be scrapped now and to start again from scratch. Now, you put a clip, you sent me a clip yesterday if you're speaking about this, that this doesn't have to proceed. And by the way, just again, for the benefit of those listening from outside, because I think what we're doing here is an effective summary of all the madness that's been going on over the last month, because people need to keep getting updated and they want to know what the latest position is. So now we've give the full background on the race, if you want to call it a race. The first person to drop out since I heard you spoke on Saturday, you talked about there's going to be 3 boxes on that ballot paper. No, 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 and spoil your vote at the end. That was the whole thing. Well, there's still probably going to be 3 boxes, but there's not going to be 3 presidential nominations because one of them, the said football man, Micheals man, has now dropped out amid a scandal that has broken about unpaid rent or rent that was paid to his account by a former tenant years ago. Granted, it was, I think, a computer glitch. He kept paying him rent after he had moved out, but he made him aware of it. He sent them letters about it. He approached them about it. He said, "You owe me over €3,000. Can I have that back? I'm expecting a child and we need the money." And to this day, I think this was 10, 15 years later, he's still waiting for it. It's still in Jim Gavin's back pocket, or maybe it's in somebody else's back pocket.
It's all very grubby. It's all very
grubby because
grubby,
even when you dig a little bit further down, I covered this a few days ago, that Gavin wasn't even registered as a landlord when he was acting as a landlord and pocketing extra cash from his tenants. So he's now thrown the towel in from the race. He said, "I'm not running anymore. I think after a period of mature reflection, I need to step back from all of this." There's egg on Micheál Martin's face. But Gavin's name, and this is adding to the insanity, Gavin's name apparently will still be on the presidential ballot after being reviewed by the Attorney General. You can still vote for Jim Gavin on the election day. He could still be the winner of the presidential race. So you have a man effectively that's tarnished by, these allegations, who's withdrawn from the race, who's still on the ballot, and could still be nominated as the next president of Ireland. Help me to comprehend that, please.
Right. Well, first of all, I mean, Jim Gavin, the Fianna Fáil nominee, is not a politician. He was a football manager. Apparently, he was very well known. Personally, I never heard of him. But one way or the other, he was Fianna Fáil's nominated person, mainly because of the push by the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin. But one way or the other, because the scandal arose, financial scandal, a very grubby scandal, and a streak of meanness in which a man wasn't returned what, by modern standards, is a relatively small sum of money. and it's still in this guy's back pocket. But the difficulty about the whole thing is that Fianna Fáil dropped support, and Jim Gavin is his name. He withdrew, but he hasn't withdrawn. From his point of view, maybe he has withdrawn, but from the Electoral Commission's point of view, he has not withdrawn because, as you said, his name is still on the ballot paper. People will have an opportunity to vote for him, and in theory, he could become the next president. And if he becomes the next president, that would be valid. This is the extraordinary thing. Advice from a senior legal person was obtained last night, and we were told that if his name, if enough people vote for him, and if he actually wins the election, he becomes president. The only difference is he's president without the backing of the Fianna Fáil political party. Now, in view of all of this, it's highly unlikely that he is going to become president. But even where I live here in Dublin and Sandymount, I mean, outside of my house, there are, at the end of the avenue, there are all sorts of posters up in favour of Gavin, still up. So people are very much aware of him. He's by far the most famous electoral candidate going up for president, for all the wrong reasons, I hasten to add, but at least on everybody's lips. And I mean, that in itself's worth a few votes. So he's going to get some votes anyway. Now, the real thing is, what about the second preferences? The second preferences are going to be distributed as normal. Now, just imagine somebody who benefits from those second preferences and becomes president as a result. How does the person feel who doesn't benefit from those second preferences? That person may very well say, I've been robbed of the election because this is an invalid candidate. Now, we're in strange legal territory here, and nobody knows exactly what's the likelihood, and that these things ultimately can be appealed to the courts. So even whatever president we get, and there's only two in the race now, there will be a certain cloud hanging over them. Now, we've been initially caught on the back foot to some extent because when Maria Steen and others were so cleverly, well, they thought it was clever, so I suppose unfairly excluded from the ballot paper, we were wondering, a number of us, a good number of people were wondering, what on earth do we do with this? It wasn't going to be a fait accompli by the government. We had to do something. So the obvious thing to do would be to withdraw authority from behind any president by simply getting enough people to spoil the vote. And that's why in O'Connell Street, outside our historic post office, I was able to say, vote no, no, no. In other words, to spoil the vote in that way, because there were three names and still are three names on the ballot paper. But things have moved on a little bit since then. And now there's a movement to try to pull the election, to try to prevent it occurring. Now, the only way it'll be prevented is by a strong social movement, and the clock is ticking against us, and I'm very much aware of that. But there is no need to elect a president. This is the funny thing under the Irish Constitution. If we have no president, for whatever reason, when the Constitution, Bunreacht na hÉireann, was brought out in the 1930s, it was envisaged that a president could become incapacitated, could get ill, for example. So there was a need to have some provision the way presidential function can continue, and that's called presidential commission. But in order for a presidential commission to be set up, Article 14 of the Irish Constitution has to be invoked. But it buys time. It can go on for months and months and months, a presidential commission, while this whole mess is sorted out. So there's no urgency to get the presidential election over the line, if you like. And if it does go over the line, it's deeply flawed. It will be contested. The authority of the president will be undermined. So the sensible thing to do is not run it, to withdraw it and start all over again, beginning with how do you get people on the ballot in a democratic way rather than in a cartelled, exclusive way.
Well said. I'm just having this picture in my head. I come up with these crazy analogies as people are talking to me, and what should be and should have been something very straightforward, very simple, and very, how would you say, amicable. The nominations in the race for the Irish presidency. You put your nominations in, you narrow it down to who's on the ballot. You've got this period. We're now on the 8th or the 9th of October. We've got until the 24th of October. The posters are going up. The rounds are being done. Heather's out there in her Wellington boots and at the ploughing competition. And she's yesterday we had Catherine Connolly. I think she was up in Galway, and I want to come to that because she was put on the spot about work she'd done as a barrister for banks, potential repossession cases when she's putting herself forward as some kind of heroine of the socialism. But putting all that aside, you're now talking about the potential of, okay, on Saturday, we had three candidates. It's now what, Thursday, less than a week later. Now we've got two candidates, but one of the three candidates who's not there anymore is still there. His face is still on lampposts, not too far away from your house. You can still vote for him.
He's still a valid candidate, though,
He's
Rick.
still a valid candidate, but the whole thing is becoming more and more of a sham. So the sensible thing, as you've rightly said, the sensible thing to do would be, look, let's pause. Let's invoke Article 14 of the Constitution. We don't need a president right now. We can function without one. Other methods have been put in. Let's reset. Let's bring some credibility back to this position of the Irish presidency. You would think that that's what a sane, honourable, proper government would do. But remember, Vincent, not that you need any remembering or reminding of this, but we're not dealing with a bunch of sane, rational, functioning people whose best will is for the people of Ireland on this role of the presidency. So much so, and I'm not going to try and kibosh or poo-poo the idea that you have just put forward, because I'm behind you 100%. But I don't know if you know about this or not, but yesterday, late last night, the bookies, who are usually a reasonably good barometer of the way things are going, the bookies, Paddy Power, the bookies, have said that they are now ready to pay out early on Catherine Connolly's winning of the Irish presidential election in 2025. Paddy's paid out on independent candidate Catherine Connolly winning the race for Aras and Uachtaráin before we even go to the polls. So Paddy Power is now ready to put his hands in his pocket and say, Vincent, you're talking about stopping this. You're talking about invoking Article 40. You're talking about, forget about it, Vincent. We have already started paying out people that have backed Catherine bloody Connolly. That's how bad it is. I think they want to do everything in their power to actually make sure this does go ahead, because it'll shine even more of a light on this shambles if it doesn't.
Yeah, but that's the problem, of course. I mean, if it can be put over the line, the hope from the two major political parties is that it will go away, even though they're the losers when you think about it. But I mean, I suppose Catherine Connolly, the likelihood is she will get in, simply because there's always maybe a 20% hard left socialist sort of vote anyway. You get that in most countries, less so perhaps in Ireland. But then on top of that, there's a huge sense of disenfranchisement from a lot of people, and sadly, many of them will vote for Catherine Connolly as a protest rather than do what I believe is the correct thing to do, which is to spoil the vote by voting no, no, no. And this is why we're trying to put that up as an option for those so many people who feel disenfranchised. I mean, the likelihood is she probably will get in, if only because the opposition, the other candidate, Heather Humphreys, is a complete non-entity in so many ways. And that's not to take from her as a human being, as a person, but regarding achievements, regarding sellability, regarding, you know, how she performs, how she empathizes, how she interacts with people. It's 0, 0, 0 for all of that. And Catherine Connolly is presentable and all of the usual, and in effect, she and articulate. So she's likely to get in, regardless of her policies, which are utterly extreme, from support from Hamas. I mean, I put it out in a video earlier on. Does that mean that at some point an international arrest warrant might be issued against her? Does that mean our president won't be able to make visits to overseas countries, except perhaps North Korea? I mean, are we reduced to that? People need to think ahead of the consequences in voting for Catherine Connolly. But yes, I agree with Paddy Power. I mean, you know, bookies tend to be a good barometer of effect, and that's it. And she certainly doesn't want the election stopped, but you know, it really ought to be stopped. It's the only decent way where you get a president at the end of it all without controversy. Any president we get now will be undermined, will be flawed, because the process is flawed, and will always have struggle and have difficulty in claiming allegiance.
I'm glad you included the Article 14 section on the Constitution, because people always ask, well, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? We're examining all the options here, and that is what you've presented as a viable, credible, legal option to do that. But because of this constraint of time, literally the walls are closing in on this race at a rapid rate of knots. It's only going to be 2 more weeks before the actual people go to the polls. So you're left with this situation whereby Maria Steen has been, and all the other credible candidates have been, blocked off of the vote. One of the three, and I believe the race was at its, the last time they only had 3 candidates in the race, correct me if I'm wrong, was I think 1990. Now that it's down to a 2-horse race or a 2-nag race, it's the lowest amount of choice, I think, in 52 years. And almost like it's not going to be the best candidate's going to win this, it's going to be the least bad, or the most articulate versus the least articulate, or somebody that's going to appeal to someone. And it's a sad state of affairs, I'm sorry to say this, that Catherine Connolly, who bookies are now already paying out for to become the next president, that woman, I mean, again, I just don't see I don't see life there. I see, my old granny used to describe people as being sleeked. I don't know if you've got that expression down in Dublin, sleeked, but she's got a little bit of this, the grin, and she grins when she's being asked questions. For example, why did you hire someone with a gun conviction? She'll smile at you. Or yesterday when she was asked, did you represent banks to evict clients? She smiled at you. I find that very, very unsettling. And she's just grey. There's no life about her.
She knows to say nothing when challenged because she knows she's in the leading position. So the golden rule is don't make mistakes. I mean, when she was challenged in University Galway by a young man, law student, Elijah Burke, she basically said nothing and allowed the students instead to clap and cheer and whatever it was. And she knew to say nothing in a case like that because he effectively was going to ask her how many genders are there or something to that effect. So she didn't want to get into that. So she knew to say nothing. And that is her golden rule. If you're in the lead, say nothing. Be nice, smile, but don't say anything controversial because your vote can only go down. And that seems to be her policy. But could I say something else that's very significant about Article 14 of the Irish Constitution? While I'm calling for it to be invoked now, it can also be invoked after the election. And people often don't know that. And I got some senior counsel advice yesterday on that, kindly offered to me by a good friend who's in this area. And what she suggested was that it can be invoked after the election is held as well, because the president, although elected, has not been inaugurated, and that is something else, and also there'll be controversy when she's inaugurated because Catherine Connolly has declared herself to be an agnostic, which, would not be something that most Irish people were very much in agreement with. So she won't be sworn in on the Bible, whatever it will be. I mean, so there's a whole range of things downstream from Catherine Connolly that's going to unnecessarily alienate an awful lot of people, and again, undermine her ultimate authority. But we're in a situation where she may very well come about, but it can be stopped after the election, is what I'm saying, before the inauguration. But again, it's Parliament that has to invoke Article 14. Nobody else can.
Just before we move on to spoil the vote tactic, okay, which is what I want to finish on. But before we get there, you mentioned about allegiances that Connolly would have in the backing she had. She's got Sinn Féin behind her. She's got the Communist Party of Ireland behind her. She's got People Before Profit. She's got the Labour Party. She's got the Socialists in there. They're all salivating at the thought that she could be the next figurehead for Ireland. And I heard her yesterday. She was being asked, what do you foresee if you're successful in this role or getting this position? Where will you go first? Where will you go first? And she mentioned 3 places. 3. The first one she mentioned was, I want to go up north. Maybe she wants to come and visit me. Maybe she wants to appear on this channel. I would love to talk to her. Believe you me, I would love to talk to her. But at this time, with her lips pursed tightly shut, I don't think she'll be talking to me. So she wants to come up here, number one, because we know she's part of the Sinn Féin call for the United Ireland. So she has to be ticking that box. The second place she said she would like to go that she hasn't been yet is to Palestine. Of course, Palestine. And then she threw in for extra virtue signaling points. Sudan. She said there's a terrible crisis going on in Sudan there. I would like to go there. And you just mentioned about her, whether or not she would be allowed to have international travel based on her support for certain organizations. She's already talking about the North. She's talking about Sudan. She's talking about Palestine. Why doesn't she say, well, you know what? I really need to get my ass down to Dublin because there's a big children's hospital there that's grossly over budget and way behind track. And there's children dying in pain with scoliosis. I need to visit some of the people that are living in temporary accommodation, some of the 5,000 Irish children, because we're banging on about how everyone deserves a home. And never mind the fact that I might have been involved in evicting people from their homes. Never mind that. We need to focus in on what's happening in Ireland. Why is there no focus on Ireland? Why does it always have to be looking afar and sorting out the rest of the world's problems when we have enough problems of our own? Why couldn't you just say, I'm going to Cork first, and when I finish in Cork, I'm going to head up to Galway, and I might visit Belfast, and when I'm finished there, I'm going into the East Wall in Dublin. The place is an absolute mess. Why can't you come out with a statement like that? Is that not virtuous enough?
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to happen either. I mean, first of all, she has the backing of mainstream media, and that's one of the problems. It's a problem in many, many countries where the legacy media tends to, for different reasons, support a kind of a broad left of centre approach to things. And that's probably the main reason there. I mean, when you mention about travelling to Palestine and travelling everywhere else, I mean, the reality is the Irish diaspora are in the United States. Why doesn't she travel to Washington? I mean, that'd be the first place you ought to go. And historically, that always has been the place where Irish presidents and others have gone. Our very first international overseas visit by a president actually was to the United States, if you exclude a trip to the Isle of Man by De Valera. But having said all that, that's not going to happen because, again, there'd be hostility towards her, obviously, in Washington and vice versa. But that is what we need. That's what a president needs to do, to reach out to all Irish people, people who claim an Irish heritage, who have a genetic or cultural connection with the island of Ireland. And that traditionally has been a role of the president as well. And we're going to alienate the vast majority of our diaspora, where the vast majority of our diaspora live, which happens to be the United States. I mean, that's a very bad start as well. It is an unworthy start. It is a start of exclusion because it excludes so many people. But then when you think about it, the election itself is about exclusion, because if you include Fianna Fáil, if you include the don't knows, if you include the spoiled votes, I mean, well over 50% of people are being disenfranchised, simply do not have anybody worthy to vote for. So the whole thing is an absolute shambles. It's an international embarrassment, but it also has the potential for producing an awful lot of danger, an awful lot of damage to international reputation if Catherine Connolly gets in. And remember, the Sinn Féin and others are totally in favour of a whole range of things, like open borders, like the whole LGBTQ transgender stuff, to be pushed into Irish schools as part of the agenda, almost known as social SPHE programs and all of that. They're utterly and totally behind that. So ordinary, decent centrists and right of centre people will have no voice. And again, we'll feel utterly and totally excluded. And that's why we turn up to outside the historic post office in O'Connell Street. That's why we're there. And that's why we're calling for a spoiled vote, for people to spoil their vote, which is a vote. If you spoil your vote, you are voting. That's the important point to get across. It is a recorded vote. And we want to get the majority, the vast, as many as possible, to come out and say no, 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 or anything you like, write it on the paper, but spoil that vote to undermine any authority. Because if that happens, if the majority of the votes were no, 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 then there'd be a very strong case for invoking Article 14 after the election, but before the inauguration.
Well said. And I wanna just close off by looking at this business of spoiling the vote, right? So I made in fact, it was after your speech in Dublin on Saturday. I put a video clip up on Saturday night using your 1 minute piece to camera to Philip Dwyer about what you've just said about the importance of spoiling the vote. I also put forward a suggestion of my own. And again, I'm not telling anybody what to do. It's just a suggestion that 100% the votes need to be spoiled. There needs to be a massive push to spoil the vote. Number one, that's indisputable. The second thing is various people have said, put your candidate of choice, put down better housing, spoil that vote. Agreed, 100%. My suggestion was, and it's a humble suggestion, is that it may add a little bit more power to the spoil your vote campaign if all the votes were spoiled in similar ways, i.e., if a candidate was picked, for example, if one name kept appearing at the bottom of that vote, Maria Steen, even though, for example, you might have favored Nick Delahanty or somebody else for the purposes of unity, which is something that's sadly lacking in any resistance to the government at this point in time. Everyone's off doing their own thing and everything's fractured and fragmented. A unified spoil your vote campaign, not just to spoil your vote, but to spoil it in a certain way, if you're amenable to partaking it that way, that Maria Steen's name, just for simple use of unity, would be added to the bottom of that. Stick a line through it, put X's, no. But if a name was to appear at the bottom of every spoiled vote, all of a sudden it's not just there's a million spoiled votes, but there's a million spoiled votes with one woman's name at the bottom, the woman that was cruelly, I say, and disgracefully excluded from getting on the ballot in the first place. So spoil it for sure. My humble suggestion is to unify it and crystallize it just a little bit more by having a uniform spoiling. But of course, not everybody's going to do that or want to do that. But it's just my humble suggestion.
Well, I think very many will. I mean, I will for one. I mean, her name will appear, and I'll have a number one after it, and I'll probably have no down with the other three people as well, who really are just sort of dummy rubber stampers, who'll stamp every bit of legislation coming across without referring anything to the Supreme Court. But leaving that aside, that's a very, very good suggestion. I think a lot of people will do that. I don't think the media will necessarily report on it. They'll simply put it down as spoiled votes. And if you have a 0.5% spoiled vote or something like that, they'll say, oh, well, you always get spoiled votes. But if you've got 10%, if you've got 15%, if you've got 20% spoiled votes, and if we can get it up to that traction going, then yes, that will be reported on. Whether they'll actually report that a name appears again and again, I don't know if they will vet that out, or if they'll actually put that in. But certainly I'll be putting down sort of Maria Steen in it. I might just say as well that it's a big uphill battle, because in Ireland we do not have a tradition of spoiling votes, unlike continental Europe, where a spoiled vote is a very valid political thing to do. In Ireland, I mean, if you spoil your vote, it means you made a mistake. And this is why, for the most part, spoiled votes tend to be minuscule. We don't have that tradition. So there's a whole effort on educating an entire population within a very short time frame. So we're realistic in what we can achieve. But the more the merrier. Every spoiled vote will be recorded and will up the percentage. And that's what we need to do, to be able to say, look, this president has no authority. This president might be going to Hamas or whatever you like, but not in my name, because I didn't vote for her and so many others didn't vote. We spoiled our vote instead as a protest. So the more spoiled votes, the more authority the people have, and the less authority this sort of contrived fake democracy has.
I'm laughing and smiling as you're talking. They're not because of what you've just said, but I'm rewinding back and I'm looking at you and I'm listening to you and I'm remembering what you said at the very beginning of this conversation, that your background was you're a medical doctor, you've served for a very, very long time, you fell foul of the regulators. And there's so many men like you that I've talked to over the last few years, professional men who were at the top of their profession, whether it be in Australia, people that were involved in regulating drugs for big pharma that turned completely against them, people in the medical profession that have turned completely against it, people in the legal profession that have become completely disenfranchised. And, I'm now looking at you, I'm sure you never foresaw, even 5 years ago, that the position you're in now, although you're sitting smiling, I don't think you have a problem with being, I don't think you like to see what you're seeing, but you're taking the bull by the horns and you're saying, I'm not just going to let this slide. It's almost, dare I say, it's maybe breathed life into the old dog and rejuvenated you a little bit as you thought you were going to drift into the garden, do some weeding, maybe write a book and take a cruise. Now all of a sudden you find yourself on the steps of the GPO saying, spoil your vote, and talking to me. And I never thought I would be talking to anybody like you, and certainly never thought I would be talking about Irish politics, let alone the presidential election. But here we are. It's it's a strange life we're living in,
Well, it
isn't it?
is, isn't it? But you never know the way life takes you, and you just have to be open to it, and have to allow for it. But
Yes.
there is, but you always must do the decent thing. You
Yes.
almost must do what is noble, what is correct. In my particular case, I mean, if I find that there's a biblical backing to what I'm doing, I'm extremely happy to go along that route. But I'm utterly convinced what's happening is wrong, and that what I'm doing and what a whole cohort of Irish people are doing is right. But there's still vast numbers of people who still are over trusting. And to trust is a good thing. You know, to trust can be a good thing if the people you're trusting are worthy of your trust. But those days are gone now. There's
Yeah.
self seeking, self serving, self interested people out there who will sell this country from under your feet. And that must be opposed and that must be stopped. And there's more and more patriotic people rising up in organized and rising up, and we will reclaim our country and reclaim the democracy that underpins Irish society and that has been taken away from us. That will stop, and we will be in the ascent, and we will restore this country to its rightful place with its rightful people again. Make no mistake about that.
Amen. Wow, what a speech. I tell you what, I'm privileged. I'm very privileged that I get to talk to some great people who really have fire in their bellies and who can articulate their points. You know, I don't have a lot of guests on this show. I tend to have a little curated bunch that I really like as people. They're not big names. They're just people with fire in their bellies, an experience and a love for their country and their people. I believe you fall into that category. There's a guy in Cavan. I speak to an ex-Garda, John Wilson. He's very similar to yourself. Mark Anthony in Cookstown in the heart of Mid-Ulster is another one, an absolute expert on the Irish Constitution. Also, John Waters, Philip Dwyer, who's out there at the coalface, you know, getting abuse, getting beaten, getting arrested, getting in front of court all the time. So many great people that I'm very, very happy to have on here. And I really appreciate you coming on today. Like I said, I've never spoke to you before. I've never knew anything about you until Saturday, but somehow I feel like we've known each other for maybe quite some time. So Dr. Vincent Karl, and by the way, the links to whatever social media pages you use, I will include them in the description box underneath this video. So please go and check out what Vincent has to say. I want to believe this hasn't been a traumatic experience for you. And maybe if it's not too much of an imposition, maybe we'll get talking again about this sooner rather than
Oh,
later.
my privilege, absolutely. No, it's been an absolute delight being here this morning.
Well, I appreciate your time. I'm sure you've got other things you could have been doing, but you chose to step out of that and speak to me today. So for any listeners out there, leave me a comment in the comment section below. And of course, cut and paste the link to this video. It's really simple to do. You just cut and paste the link, drop it into WhatsApp groups in particular. That is a very powerful way to spread the message. Share in WhatsApp groups, share on if you use Facebook, even email list. Throw it out there and people can take it or leave it. But the important thing is that these messages need to be heard. So for now, anyway, that's Dr. Vincent Karl. I'm Rick Munn. This is No Risk, No Reward Media, and we are over and out.